Hi, e-commerce shop owner. So today we are going to be continuing what we've been talking about when it comes to podcasts and YouTube. And the questions that I want to answer today are, what are good podcast and YouTube stats? How often do podcasts and or YouTube channels fail? And ultimately, is it worth it? So what we're going to be talking about, again, is podcast and YouTube stats today. And I have compiled a bunch of stats that I want to reveal to you. I'll give you my sources and we will kind of talk about what that means for you, right? So in your small business, you can do more than just post to regular social media and create your products. I know, especially if you're a one-person shop, this may sound overwhelming. So I want to answer the question for you. The real question here is it worth it for you to make time to do these other things? If you're joining me live, I'd love to hear from you. Go ahead and comment below. Tell me if you think a YouTube channel or a podcast are worth it and why or why not. I'd love to know what you think. So let's go ahead and jump right into the stats today. First, we're going to do kind of a comparison YouTube versus podcast. A lot of these stats, I don't have direct comparisons, but there's similar stats that we can kind of compare. So first of all, 62% of internet users access YouTube daily and 92% access YouTube weekly. And this is in the US, internet users in the United States. Meanwhile, on a podcast, 38% of Americans access a podcast in the last month, and 26% in the last week. So let me do a direct comparison. In a week, 92% of US citizens access YouTube. 26% have accessed a podcast. So there's a big difference in numbers, but still 26% for a podcast is almost a third of people in the US have listened to a podcast in the last week. And this is important to note because all of us understand that YouTube is a big platform. Very few of us have bothered to consider whether or not a podcast is a big platform. So we're going to go over some kind of differences between considering having a YouTube channel versus a podcast for your brand. So there are 247 million US YouTubers. 247 million. So this is how big of an audience you'd be competing with should you start a YouTube channel. Meanwhile, there are only 850,000 active podcast US podcasts. So 850,000 is still a lot, but it is significantly less than 247 million. So let's go ahead and keep moving through these numbers. 70% of people on YouTube have made a purchase related to what they watched on YouTube. 60% of podcast listeners have bought something based upon what they've heard on a podcast. So those are actually very similar numbers, 70% and 60%. So both of these platforms have very high likelihood of converting into a sale, assuming that you're good at marketing and you're able to explain to them why they should buy from you. But so I want to kind of compare these. YouTube is clearly the giant. Way more people are using it to become YouTubers than podcasters. So you have a lot more competition on YouTube. Flat out, that's just the reality. You're going to have more competition on YouTube than you will on a podcast. The second thing is, YouTube has more people that are participating in it, that are using it. But there's still a decent number of people on podcasts or listening to podcasts. And then finally, both platforms have very good purchase conversion, meaning that people will go and actually buy after watching or listening to your episodes or videos. There's more about purchase conversion where podcasts potentially have higher purchase conversion in the long run, but that I feel is kind of debatable, so we're not going to get into that. But suffice it to say, both of these can be good sources for purchase conversion. My YouTube channel is my highest purchase conversion of any platform that I am on, so I know that YouTube has good purchase conversion. So let's move past that. So those are kind of, well, what does it mean to have a YouTube channel versus a podcast channel? Here's what YouTube has to offer. Here's what podcast has to offer. Let's break it down a little bit more. So next, I want to talk about what metrics you're going to be striving towards should you have a YouTube channel or a podcast. So first on YouTube, your click-through rate. So when someone sees your thumbnail and then they click on it and go to your actual video, that's the click-through rate we're talking about. It's called the impression click-through rate. On YouTube, the average, according to Google, is a 2 to 10% click-through rate. That's the average for a YouTube channel. Now, the industry standard, depending upon who you ask and who you listen to, is usually somewhere around 4%. So 4, 5, I've heard 3% is the industry standard. So you want that percentage of your audience. So if 100 people view your thumbnail, you want somewhere between 2 and 10 of those people to click and actually watch your video. That is a very normal metric on YouTube that you should be striving for. So this is all based around having an excellent thumbnail, okay? Audience retention is another number that you're going to hear people talk about when it comes to YouTube. Your audience retention, according to vidIQ, which is a big player in YouTube, should be about 50% if you have a 5-minute or longer video. At 30 seconds, it should be 70%. So this, again, is another goal metric of what it is you want to see if you're on a YouTube channel. On a podcast, 80% of listeners listen to all or most of every episode. So this is kind of they're not direct comparisons, but this is kind of my example comparison. So on YouTube, there is a very low retention. It is difficult to get people to stay through the entire video. That's just a reality. You have to learn how to set it up to grab their attention and make that work. On a podcast, if they come and listen to your podcast, 80% of them are going to listen to the whole thing. So you're not fighting that retention block the way you do on YouTube. So there's a little bit of a difference between a podcast and YouTube. YouTube, you've got to figure out how to keep them going. So let's get an idea of what kind of an average podcast is. So if you get 25 to 30 downloads or listens, depending upon what podcast platform you're on, they call it different things, it's going to put you in the top 50% of podcasts, 25 to 30. Not thousands, not just 25 to 30. I couldn't find direct numbers for this on YouTube. When I looked up the average YouTube numbers, they were taking an average across all channels. So they were taking huge and then averaging what was small. So I didn't find a good way to find an average channel, what their views are. But the average, if you were taking an average across all YouTube channels, which is not really fair, it's not a direct comparison, was between 3,000 and 8,000, depending upon your industry. But again, that's not a comparison to the number I just gave you for podcasts. So fewer people are seeing a podcast episode, which makes sense based upon the number of people on the platform, et cetera, et cetera. If you're doing an average across everything, if you're talking about small YouTube channels versus small podcast channels, you're going to find that that's not going to be the case so much. Those are probably going to be very similar. That's just based on my experience of looking at smaller channels. If you're joining us live, we are talking about podcasting and YouTubing and whether or not it's a good choice for your business. So I'm kind of doing some comparisons between the two. And then at the end, we're going to kind of talk about whether this is worth your time or not. So let's go ahead and move on. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about monetization. I want to talk to you about making money. Both of these platforms, YouTube and podcasting, give you the opportunity to sell your own product or be an affiliate or whatever other thing you want to do. We're not going to talk about that because there just are so many different ways to make that happen. I have successfully made money from my own products on both of these platforms. So this is something you can definitely do, and it's going to be really hard for me to give you a dollar amount because you could be selling something that's $1, you could be selling something that's $200. That's clearly going to make a difference in how much money you're able to generate. But what we can compare between these two platforms is their ad setup and their ads revenue. So what I did is I scoured the internet and I found, we're actually not to that point yet. So I found some stats from Donna Tang. She is from Credit Donkey. And she talks about how, based upon her research, you can expect to make about $18 for every 1,000 views. And I actually saw this similar numbers across other places that I was looking at. So this appears to be semi-accurate, okay? Again, these numbers are based upon 1 or 2 people. You have to go with that, okay? So accurate. So what that means is that you would have to get 2.7 billion views to make $50,000, okay? So we're gonna use $50,000 as our point of reference just because that's a number that's round and we can go with it, right? So to get that $50,000, this particular channel had they're estimating 100 to 200,000 subscribers. So to get 100 to 200,000 subscribers on YouTube would get you approximately 2.7 billion views, and you can make around $50,000. So those are kind of your ballpark numbers. 100 to 200,000 subscribers to get $50,000, 2.7 billion views to make $50,000. Those are kind of our ballpark for YouTube, okay? When I looked up similar stats for a podcast, what I came across was that when you're looking to get about $50,000, you're actually going to be looking more at a time period. And the time period that I found was 24 months. So 2 years to become profitable, meaning over $50,000 a year, and that is for a podcast. So I didn't get a time for YouTube. I got a time for the podcast. So let's talk a little bit about how long it would take you to get 100,000 to 200,000 subscribers. So there is actually a resource. It is called, oh, now I've lost it, of course. Give me a second, I'll find it for you guys. There's a resource that will allow you, if you have a YouTube channel, to look into Social Blade. I remembered. Social Blade will actually give you like a broadcast, like an estimate of how long it'll take you to reach a certain number of views and subscribers. And sorry, I'm getting a notice that maybe I'm not live anymore. No, it looks like I'm still live. So if you guys are watching me, if you just comment so that I know that you're still seeing me. So Social Blade will actually give you an estimate of how long it'll take you to reach a certain number of subscribers. So my channel is small, and I've looked these numbers up for many different YouTube channels. And to get to 100,000 subscribers is going to be years and years and years and years, unless you have a very niched product. I'm talking specifically to e-commerce shop owners. So you're not teaching exactly, you're not going to have the exact same kind of channel that would get this many subscribers. You are talking way more than 2 years. We're just going to put it at that. It is going to be years and years and years, unless you have some kind of, Oprah talks about you, maybe. But aside from that, it is going to take you far more than 2 years to reach 100,000 subscribers, okay? So those are kind of our ideas of where we should hit about $50,000. So let's talk about something that's a little bit smaller. So Daniel's Brew actually has published an article where he talks about how much money he made in his first year of being a YouTuber. He managed to hit 4,000 subscribers in the first 4 months of being a YouTuber. And then over the course of that year, he made about $5,000. So I want to talk about his numbers. We're going to do a comparison between him and my podcast. My YouTube channel is not monetized, so I can't do a comparison between those two platforms. Now, I do have the same podcast episodes on my YouTube channel as videos as well. But as I said, I'm not monetized, so I haven't made money off of that there. I have made money on my podcast. So let's talk a little bit. So Daniel says that he had, on his first month of being monetized, he managed to get 172,000 views over 19 videos. And in this article, he talks about how he has about 8,000 subscribers, but we're not going to worry about subscribers right now. We're going to just focus on the views. So on his channel, he had 172,000 views on 19 videos. He made $711. So because I wanted to give you something where you can compare apples to apples, let's pretend that I was able to get 172,000 views on my podcast. On my podcast, which is monetized, I make about 0.5 cents per listen. So they're not called views, or download. Different platforms for podcasts call them different things. So if I had 172,000 listens or downloads or plays, however they're calling it, it would make me $892. So 172,000 views on his YouTube channel was $711. And 172,000 views on my podcast would be around $892. That gives you an idea. So those are pretty close to the same ballpark. And you have to keep in mind we have different audiences, and of course they're not the same content, but it kind of gives you an idea. But 172,000 views is a lot of views or a lot of listens. But I wanted to kind of take that down from the 50,000 up. So time-wise, it seems plausible if you are committed to doing one podcast episode a week, that is the average for podcasts, that you could potentially be making $50,000 a year within 2 years, okay? That seems to be a general, that I'm seeing consensus across the board. If you are consistent, if you know your audience, if you're doing the things you're supposed to do. Let's assume the same on YouTube. You're doing the things you're supposed to do. You know your audience, you know who you're marketing to, et cetera, et cetera. It is going to take you more than 2 years, unless there is some other crazy thing. And of course, same thing with a podcast, unless there's some other crazy thing going on. Now, both of these platforms are going to do better when you are elsewhere as well. So you're going and speaking on someone else's channel, you're doing advertising, all of these things will increase your speed. So you can do things to make this stuff happen faster, but the reality is you have more competition on YouTube, and there is no evidence that I've been able to find that shows that YouTube can build as fast as a podcast. I have released 10 episodes on my podcast. I'm already ranked 220th. My YouTube channel is ranked at like 7,897th, to give you a point of reference. And I have been working on my YouTube channel for significantly longer than my podcast. So It appears, based upon my own experience and what I've been able to find on the internet, that it may be faster to build a podcast than a YouTube channel. Now, if you are an e-commerce maker, what is your podcast going to be about? It may be harder to do than if you are getting on YouTube. So am I saying one of these platforms is bad and one of them is good? That is not what I'm saying at all. My own personal experience, I have made more money on my YouTube channel than on my podcast. I can tell you that outright. That is selling my own products though. So these are both really good platforms that both have very high purchase conversion, and either one of them could be a good choice for your business. Let's talk about a few more stats that I found while I was doing this research. On YouTube, there are 500 hours of video uploaded every minute. This is from Oberlo. So 500 hours every minute. So again, this comes back to the competition on YouTube is much higher than the competition on a podcast. The top 3% of channels get 90% of the traffic on YouTube. Again, there's not as much traffic for the people that aren't in the top 3%. So again, a lot more competition. We're fighting over 10% of the traffic to YouTube. And that was according to Fortune. 96.5% of YouTubers cannot break the US poverty line. Again, that is according to Fortune magazine. So there are a lot of YouTubers. It is high competition. You still have the potential to make money there. You have to be willing to stick it out. The same thing is true of a podcast. I just told you that if you want to hit $50,000, you're looking at making it at least 2 years. So from the initial outset for both of these platforms, you are looking at, I remember when I started YouTube, they told me it would take 6 months to a year to really see any improvement. I don't think that's, yes, of course I've grown my channel and blah, 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 whatever. But to actually start making money on those channels, you are probably looking at least a year to a 2-year commitment on either one of them if you want to actually make money on a podcast or YouTube. So my recommendation for you is to ask yourself if you're willing to do that. If you are willing to be consistent for a year to 2 years to see an actual return on your investment. And if you are, if that is within the timeline of what you think is reasonable, then by all means, do one or both of those. If you are not, this is not where you should be going, okay? Because it is not going to be an instant thing. And anyone who tells you that it is blowing smoke or has some special secret, they're super famous and they're gonna promote your channel, or you've got an opportunity to appear on Oprah or something like that. Those things, of course, will make a difference. But if you are talking about just starting a channel and trying to build it, it is going to take you a year, 2 years on either of these platforms. And the reality is, from what I have seen from my own clients, I have worked with hundreds of clients of my own and in my own channels, it seems to be true of any platform. You are looking at a year to 2 years before you start really seeing a return on your investment. So you need to be smart about where you invest your time. That is kind of the point of this week. We were talking all about analytics this month. So if you missed the week on analytics for emails, go back and watch that. We did a whole week on analytics for your website, Google Analytics specifically. Go back and watch that. This week was all about YouTube's and podcasts. I just want to make sure I haven't missed anything. Oh, I'm sorry, I kind of forgot to give you the downsides of podcasts here. So for podcasts, less than 20% survive 1 year. That's according to Slam Marketing. So if you think about that, 2 out of 10, 1 out of 5 will survive a year on a podcast. And the average podcast lifespan is 174 days. So people make it about 6 months, 7 or 8 months, 7 months, and then they don't keep going. So those are from Dan Meisner. These are actually stats from 2018. I couldn't find anything more current as far as that goes. So these may not be completely accurate, but I wanted to have at least something to give you. So podcast versus YouTube, it's a great question that I hear from my clients because I do talk about both. I'd love to know your opinion. Do you think a podcast is better or a YouTube channel? Do you think you should be doing both? Neither? Give me your feedback about how you feel about this. And thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and go and watch those old videos if you didn't get to see them. I am doing these videos live on TikTok and then I repost them across platforms. So join me on TikTok to join me live, or go see me on other social media. It's MyScheduledBiz. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you tomorrow.